Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donohue as we guide you through this first week of July. Last episode had a lot of fun breaking things down with Peter Gonzalez. In addition to the 2024 Penn State recruiting class in June, he joined us for a detailed discussion on his path to this Penn State class, his recovery from a knee injury that he suffered early in 2022, and what he's looking forward to most about this upcoming senior season at Central Catholic in Pittsburgh. We also had Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider, join us to break down the latest on 2024 class movement, a commitment. Commitments are scheduled. Circle back, check that out from Monday. If you missed it, we had that one up before the holiday. Here, we're going to put a lot of focus on quarterbacks. You'll hear from Daniel Gallen a little bit later. We have 5 questions to address regarding Penn State here in the summer, still about a month away from preseason camp. But we begin with great perspective, and I think what will be an appreciated listen for many of our audience out there, and Brad Maendler. It's a familiar name, increasingly, I think, for Penn State fans. But Brad, you're a first-time visitor on this podcast, and we appreciate you for joining us.
Tyler, thanks for having me.
Well, I've had a couple of your pupils on the show in the past. We had Drew Allar back in his high school career on multiple times before he enrolled. And, of course, Ethan Grunkemeyer more recently before he headed out to the Elite 11 finals. We're going to talk about both those guys in a minute. But just to give folks a lay of the land a little bit, Brad is the owner of QB Accelerate, and he's not just working with Penn State commits and Penn State quarterbacks. He's got a list of them. We're going to talk about another one of them, actually. But can you give our listeners out there, and maybe some young quarterbacks out there who are seeking some guidance, kind of the lowdown on what you do and how you've gotten to this point in your career in football?
Sure. So QB Accelerate became a thing officially December of 2021. But the previous 15 years, I'd been doing it as a side hustle. I worked in corporate sales, and this was always something that I sort of did on the side. Met a lot of great people, a lot of smart people along the way, learned a lot of really cool things. And I'm a tinkerer. So I learn things, I tinker, I learn new things, that kind of process. So I feel like I'm getting better every year. And really like the last 3 to 4 years, we've really taken off. So very excited about the future. I've got a facility that'll be coming out online in November of this year, and that's going to change things dramatically for the business. We'll be able to scale and add more kids. And so all I would say to interested parties is just hang tight. We're going to have a really good program and be able to add more people here in the very near future.
Oh, very cool. And you can follow Brad Maendler on Twitter. He's got some links up there, too, if you're looking for more information. And Brad, of course, a couple of notable guys who I think that probably generated more interest in what you are doing as a quarterback coach, Drew, Ethan. And I figured we'd start with Drew because everyone at this point in Penn State Nation knows who Drew Allar is. He's a guy who committed as a 3-star, I think. Ended up as a 5-star by the time he signed. Ended up playing more extensively last year than any true freshman quarterback at Penn State since Christian Hackenberg. And now, although we have not heard a starting quarterback name, the anticipation is he's going to be the guy who has the keys to this very talented offense come September 2nd against West Virginia. Before we get to where Drew is now, can you go back to the origin story where you came in contact with him and who he was then?
Yeah, so I first learned about Drew right after they lost their first playoff game his sophomore year, and they played St. Ed's, which has sort of been, the 1,000-pound gorilla in Ohio high school football for about 10 years now. And he threw for over 550 yards in a playoff game against St. Ed's, and that never happens. And so that really caught my eye, and I had heard from some other people like, hey, you should take a look at this kid. He's got great size. And so I watched the highlights of that game, and you could just see it, like all the tools were there. It was just not very refined. He looked a lot like a pitcher throwing off a mound when he was throwing the football. So I just reached out to him and I said, hey, watched you, great job. I see some things that I think are great. I see some things that you could make you an elite quarterback if you could build consistency and discipline around it. So liked the message. We met and started working officially like January of 2020. And, it's kind of a semi-rough couple of months because you build a way of throwing through repetitions, through throwing it in the backyard, all those things. And so he had a lot of things that he did that just were very ingrained. So we had to kind of like unwind that stuff, teach him some new things, some new concepts. And right about the time COVID hit, he really started to hit his stride. So we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? So I gave him things to work on during the COVID period. And when he emerged in May, I was like, wow, like you've really put the work in. And then from May to August, he made another leap, because at that time his body started to come together. You know, he had this long kind of gangly frame, like a baby doe, and just had a hard time kind of like, well, that went away. And now he's getting stronger, and his natural athleticism starting to bloom a little bit. And I've never seen anything like this. All these things kind of coming together. By August of 2020, it was pretty crazy. So that's how we started together.
You make a good point, because a lot of this is happening under the cloak of darkness that was COVID on the recruiting world, on a lot of prospect development at every corner of the country back in 2020. Had he been able to go out and hit the camp scene that summer, maybe get to an Elite 11 regional, if he had been, if we were living in a normal world, would it have accelerated where he was as a prospect, or do you think he may not have been where he needed to be quite yet? I'm curious, because it's a revisionist history kind of thing, and Penn State got involved here before a lot of the bigger time schools did. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
No, that's a great question. He went to one camp that summer. It was not a college camp. It was put on by some recruiting service, I think. It might have even been Buckeye Scoop. I'm not really sure, but that was the one camp that he went to. And I heard amazing things. And had he been able to go to college camps that summer, this thing would have sped up the clock quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Because, like I said, all of these things came together, and he didn't look like this gangly kid who was a thrower, not a passer. He became a passer, being able to layer the football, being able to, take speeds, change speeds on the ball, use different arm angles. You know what I mean? Like all those things would have, people would have seen that. And like I said, it would have started the clock a lot sooner.
So a little bit further along the timeline, January of 2021 now, Kirk Shiraka dismissed as offensive coordinator. Mike Yurcich brought in as the new offensive coordinator right after that COVID-shortened season. We're all kind of wrapping our heads around that move. And then we see new quarterback offers go out. One of them goes to a 3-star in Ohio named Drew. And we all start to get to know the kid pretty fast. When did you first come in contact with Mike Yurcich about Drew? I'm sure he was picking your brain there. Was it prior to him joining the Penn State staff? And what do you remember most about when Penn State did go in on this recruitment, how they got to the finish line?
Yeah, Mike called me when he was at Texas, and he said, I love him. He goes, I found out about him. Actually, I think he found out about him through his nephew, who played for St. Ed's and was on that team that threw for 550 yards. I'd have to confirm that one, but Mike's a Cleveland guy. And so he heard and watched this film, and Mike's got a really good eye. It was a very interesting time because as you probably remember, Texas was stacked with quarterbacks in that class. And he said, look, this is not going to be popular if I do this, but I think Drew's the best for us, and I'm going to offer him. Well, then, I don't know, within 3 weeks, that staff was fired. He was going to Penn State, and we just picked up the conversations as soon as he was driving to Penn State from Austin, about halfway there. And we got on the phone. He's like, yep, I'm getting things set. I'm going to meet with coach, tomorrow. We're going to, lay these things out. It was kind of fun to be like behind the scenes to see how this was going to happen. But he was convinced that what he was seeing was somebody who could be, elite.
So he brings his notebook to James, and Drew's name's on there pretty clearly. The offer goes out there. They've got Bo Prabula committed, an in-state player. He'd been on board for a while. That didn't really disrupt their ambitions of going and getting a second quarterback. What will you remember, I guess, what do you still recall mostly about that recruitment, and why, in your opinion, Drew decided to hammer it home with Penn State and remain true to that all the way through signing day, even when some of the big fish started circling?
Yeah. Well, Penn State knows how to recruit. And I always say when you get Franklin and Yurcich and Danny O'Brien all working on a prospect, that's a money kind of proposition. And they nailed it. And they created a bond. The Allars are very humble people, and Penn State staff just knew how to connect with them, and they knew how to connect with Drew. And so it was sort of a fast friendship. Now it built, right? There was a lot of contact points and all of those things that we've come to expect through recruiting, but relationally they nailed it, and that was what won it for Penn State.
Drew got involved quite a bit as a freshman. Sean Clifford, the starter all the way through, but whether it was by design and on occasion by necessity, he was able to get some action. I think 5 total touchdowns, no interceptions on the season. What did you take away from the game reps and the practices that you may have been privy to? We heard a lot about what was going on behind the scenes. Overall, what was your big takeaway from year one for Drew Allar on this campus?
Yeah. Well, I knew in his early enrollee spring, there was high points and low points, as you would expect. Still a high school kid, should be going to his prom, but he's at Penn State practicing. But the elevation, the ascension from end of spring through the summer to fall camp, where he really established himself. He really started establishing himself during the summer after his early enrollee spring football year. During the summer, I was hearing really good reports. I trained him several times at Penn State, and so I was kind of milling around. And you hear some vibes, and I just knew things were trending in a really good way. And then when I saw him going in Purdue, I really couldn't believe what I was seeing because, first game of the year, Sean doesn't come out, after halftime, and Drew's in the game. And yeah. I remember talking to Drew after the game, and I asked him, I said, were things just moving crazy fast? He goes, nope, they weren't. He goes, he said it was actually slow. He goes, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I saw things. And that's the special part of Drew that I think Penn State fans are going to see is this dude's a football player. He just happens to have this, crazy arm talent and this great frame. But he's a football player with great anticipation and sees things, and he is uber prepared. If you get to know him a little bit, he's always early. He's always prepared. He puts in the time. He's never going to get caught not being, prepared to carry out his responsibilities. He's always going to know what he's supposed to do. And now, as the quarterback of Penn State, you got to know what everybody's doing because you're the guy. So he's got those sort of intangibles that people don't know about yet, but they're going to see that this year.
On that subject, I think you brought up a good point, that the arm talent, the frame. We've seen dozens of quarterbacks the last 15, 20 years who've had that 5-star profile, and it fizzled out once they hit the field at the college level. What we've been hearing, and I think what we saw glimpses of in his game action last year, is when the chaos begins to unfold around him, there's a calm, cool, collected nature that he can play within himself, rearrange himself if need be behind the pocket, and then reestablish. James Franklin kind of gave us a long-winded answer about Drew's development and focused on that this summer, and it kind of peeled back the curtain a bit for us. What can you kind of mention, add into that aspect? Because that's what you never know. When the bullets start flying, is he going to be able to face them and then respond? Yeah,
and I don't know that I could say anything really more or better than what Coach Franklin outlined in because I listened to that.
Sure.
But that's what he does. He doesn't get too high. He doesn't get too low, although he is very fiery. Like, you can fire him up, but like, mistakes are not going to crater him. You know what I mean? Like, okay, that happened last play. I don't even remember that. And you'll see it in the confidence he has in his arm to make throws. Mm-hmm. I've seen guys who had all the talent in the world, and as soon as things went a little south, that competitiveness, that I'm going to make that throw and I don't care what happens, I'm going to make that play and nobody's going to stop me. You know what I mean? They don't have as much conviction around that, and that's what he does.
Now we see a 6'5", 240+ pound sophomore hitting the field, and we're hearing he's helping coordinate the offensive players for non-staff involved workouts this summer, and that's going to be very important for this chemistry. But when you look ahead here into the 2023 season and where Drew is at his development, you've been with him now for 3+ years along the way. What are Penn State fans going to see when he does take over this thing ultimately?
Yeah. He makes the routine plays. And then he has this ability he's a playmaker, to make off-platform, off-schedule throws, very difficult throws, because obviously he has the arm strength and the touch to really kind of touch all areas of the field. And he's got this vision. Some people have it, some don't. But it's, call it basketball spatial intelligence, wrapped up with processing speed, but he's got that. And so having the grasp of the offense that he does and knowing where he's supposed to go with the football at all times. And then when things do break down and he has to make a play, like that's what he's been doing. And I think one of the biggest jumps I saw from his junior to senior year in football, just to go back to that for a second, was just the amount of big plays and the amount of, oh my God, throws that he made as a senior. And I thought his junior film was really good, but his senior film, like, that just jumped off the page.
It's a fun watch, folks. If you haven't watched it yet, go watch it, because it is about as good as you'll see a quarterback play at the high school level. And it's a lot of improvisational stuff, which was really fun to see.
Yep.
And I want to shift gears here because we got another quarterback to talk about. He's not on campus yet. He's got his senior season ahead of him. But Ethan Grunkemeyer, I think he turned a lot of heads when he went out to the Elite 11 finals in Los Angeles. He made the Elite 11. He's now a 4-star, top 200 overall prospect in our rankings at 247 Sports. We got an earlier look at him at the State College Regional when he punched his ticket out to Los Angeles. So we've been gathering data on Ethan, I feel like, for a few months now. But you go way back with him. Can you take us back to the beginning with Grunkemeyer?
Yeah, I started working with Ethan the summer of 2021, and when he came up to Cleveland, he always, like, I saw film of him, but I always get film of kids before they come up, and I try and understand, like, what is it that they're trying to accomplish and where they and he had a really natural stroke, real, like, clean arm path. And I've been doing this so long, and I've had kids who have little to no talent all the way up to, supremely talented kids. So I've had the full gamut. And I start to look at things like, okay, how much time are we going to have to spend on this before we can get to the next thing? And then how does that impact, the third thing that I want to get to? And I just knew I wasn't going to have to spend very much time with his arm path. It was all going to be optimizing what he did by making him much more, not only more, timed up, but like infusing his rotation with, like, more juice, if that makes sense. There's hip rotation, and then there's violent, hip rotation, which creates a lot more power and spin off the ball. So when you sort of wrap really good sequencing around that, it just sort of amplifies everything from a throwing standpoint. So I knew that was going to be what we would have to focus on with Ethan. But I knew right away, okay, this dude loves to work, and he is serious about being really good. So I saw that right away. And then it was, on him to really focus on his body, because he was smaller. I think we've all seen that come along now. He's a full 6'3" now. He's pretty muscled up. He just needs to get, bigger. And that's coming. So those are the things that I really saw when I first started working out with him, and he's just been a joy to train, because he's so eager to get better, very intense about moving the needle every time we get together. So it's pretty cool.
And so Mike Yursich comes back to looks up the contact. There's Brad. Let me reach out. They got another one. When did he start poking around about Grunkemeyer? And the offer obviously came this spring, but when did those initial dialogue kind of happen?
Yeah, I love this story because I mentioned it to somebody else, but Mike met Ethan last summer. Ethan continued to stay in touch, right? And so he would send him clips every once in a while. And then last February, I'm in State College. I'm training Drew. I'm walking with Mike to the field, the indoor facility. He goes, by the way, Ethan sent me film. Mike said, he is slinging it. He said, does he do that all the time? I'm like, yes, we've gotten it to the point now. He's gotten it to the point now where his consistency is insane, and it's as good as anyone I've ever seen.
Wow. I mean, that's saying a lot. That's saying a lot. And
so Mike saw it. You know what I mean? Like he could see the progression because Ethan had been sending him film since last summer. Like once a month, he'd just check in. Hey, coach, hope you're doing well. Just want you to know, I'm still out here and working hard. And, he did a great job with really all the programs that were recruiting him doing that. But just hearing Mike like bring that up, and I didn't like address that. I didn't try and bring it up. Like he brought it up organically and just said, hey, what's going on here? Does he do this all the time? That was pretty fun.
Wow. So that unsolicited, comment from Mike Yurcich, eventually you work your way towards a scholarship offer being there for Ethan. Yeah. He commits. How much did Drew's comfort level with the program, relationship with Mike Yurcich, and quite frankly, your also by extension familiarity with Penn State, how much was that a factor for him in being able to wrap this thing up? Because to me, I look at a recruit whose trajectory is clearly on the rise, could probably go fish around for more Power 5 offers, and you're coming up on official visit season where he could go visit 5 campuses and have a blast. He said, now I'm going to shut it down, go with Penn State, who offered him about a month earlier before that. Yeah. Why was it the right thing, and how much did all the background tie into this decision?
Yeah, everything that you mentioned there played a role. And I know he had a couple of conversations with Drew, let's lift up the hood, let's talk, and that they were really positive. And a different kid, as hot as Ethan was getting, and believe me, people were calling from all over. In fact, had he taken a visit to one of these programs that's made the college football national playoffs several times over the last several years, he would have most likely gotten an offer, and it would have been a big deal. And he said, I don't need to do that. I know where I'm going. I'm going to Penn State. And there was not even a doubt in his mind.
And I want to mention that not only did he do his thing out in Elite 11, you posted some highlights of him participating at 7-on-7 at Ohio State 7-on-7. And when you get a chance to go to a future foes campus, we've seen guys who are going to come back and play Penn State come to their 7-on-7 and perform well. So that's always an interesting dynamic of it. But take that aside from it. What did we see? Because this is the latest step in his development, the latest peak toward what he's going to be looking at like as a senior.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've worked with him a lot the last 6 months is just this idea of relaxing and letting the hips do all the work and not trying to throw hard. He has tremendous velocity. He has one of the best arms in the 24 class. I think he's in the top 3, just in terms of pure velocity. And that's taken some time, because what I've come to know over the years is when I get a smaller kid, they feel like they have to put everything into the football. So that's the way he's learned to throw over the past 8 to 10 years. Well, the body's coming around now. He knows how to, sort of be in sequence and put himself in a position where the hips are doing most of the work, and it takes the pressure off of the arm. So watching that all come together in a 7-on-7, and look, I get it. He's not getting rushed. I don't think anybody got buzzed for holding the ball too long, right? But he gets it out so fast and on time. But watching him throw with touch and just, layering the football over people, throwing a check down to a back in a real sort of catch-friendly place, without a ton of juice on it, knowing when to change speeds on the ball. I've not seen that from him. I've seen it, when we train, but like in a game environment like that, I mean, the Ethan I saw last year was throwing missiles just about every time he was throwing the football. And he just showed the full array of different, speeds, different trajectories. I couldn't be more impressed with again, granted it's 7-on-7, but what I saw.
I think in may have been early June, I saw you post a video of Ethan and Drew playing together and throwing the ball together, going through drills together under your supervision. I guess how much pride do you feel in watching those two guys work together and going back with them a few years? And two, how did they play off each other as guys who are going to be in the same quarterback room this time next year?
Yeah. It's so fun. Like I look at all these kids as like my extended family and my kids, like, cause you just like, you want them to do well and you want them to grow and you want them to get better and you want them to see this whole vision of, I'm not just trying to be a great quarterback. I'm trying to eventually apply these things I'm learning and be a great person and be a great business person and, whatever they're trying to do. So to see them train and I mean, that was such a fun day because they were both just, lighting it up. But seeing them also build this relationship because they actually didn't train all that much because Ethan, we started the summer of 2021. He started coming to the winter group sessions on the weekends, which is when he would have trained with Drew. But in the winter of 2022, that's Drew was at Penn State. So they didn't train together. So Drew would come in town. He'd go to a couple of those Sunday sessions. So they would get a chance to throw with each other. But it wasn't like they had all this built up time together. But they become like fast friends, real comfortable. They're both really humble kids. So, it's going to work. It's just, they have shared interest of trying to be a great quarterback at Penn State. So
I wanted to finish our discussion here, which I really appreciated. I think we've learned a lot about both these quarterbacks, but with a third passer to bring up in the conversation, when you were on campus that first weekend of June, not only was Ethan Grunkemeyer throwing balls, but another one of your proteges and Chase Herbstreit, and people are familiar with the name. I know it turned some heads when we mentioned he was there. The son of Kirk Herbstreit, who's probably the most prominent analyst in the college football world right now. He's at St. Xavier High School. He's a rising junior, and that is the same high school program that we once saw Sean Clifford star at and lead at state championship. So what's the early impression of a player who is going to have unfairly a lot of attention on him really early in his career before he gets a chance to do much? So what do you make of Chase Herbstreit, a guy that we got a bit of a look at early in June here on campus?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I have friends down in Jacksonville, Florida, who run a business called 6 Points, which is a quarterback training business, and it's Danny Thompson and Will Hewlett. And I've known Will Hewlett basically got me started in quarterback training. He pulled me into a quarterback training, a great quarterback training company back in 2009, the Quarterback Academy by Darren Slack, and we've known each other ever since. And they reached out and said, look. We started training Chase. They want to have somebody local that they can train with. We want to introduce you to Kirk, and we want to obviously get you involved with Chase. And so, this has been really cool because I'm a massive fan of college football. I mean, I really like pro football, but I'm a college football guy, and it's kind of hard for me not to be a little bit of a fanboy meeting Kirk and just talking with him, but he is like so unassuming and just such a good dude, like a guy that you would want to have a beer with. Like he's exactly the way he looks and, acts on TV. That's who he is. So that was really cool. Got to meet him. Chase is just a special kid because he's all yes, sir, no, sir. And he's about being a great quarterback. Like he is down for all the work. In fact, he loves to work. In fact, I don't have anyone who, I always laugh when I hear kids say, oh, I want one more. I want one more. And with Chase, one more turns into like 20 more. So he's talented. He's athletic. He's got sense. He's got quarterback sense. And, sometimes you watch somebody in shorts and T-shirts and they look awesome. And then they get into a football game and they're really not that good. Chase is not going to blow anybody away in shorts and T-shirts, but when he's between the lines, this dude can play football. And he, from a throwing standpoint, his velocity, his spin, his ball placement has made substantial jumps over the last year, and I think he's got like a tremendous future.
Chase Herbstreit, 2025 prospect out of St. Xavier in Cincinnati. As I mentioned, Liam Clifford out of that program. Brad Maendler of QB Accelerate does a great job working with quarterbacks, as you can tell, as you'll soon see in Beaver Stadium. Brad, we really appreciate your perspective here on a couple really impressive young prospects that we look forward to seeing more of in the years to come.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. This is obviously a lot of fun for me to talk about. So I'm just kind of sitting back here, just enjoying the view and watching a little football this fall. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your summer work, and then you'll get to see these guys throw it against defenses come fall. So have fun with that.
No doubt. Thank you.
Yep. Let's turn our attention to the current Penn State football squad a bit more right now. And to do that, we bring in Lions247 colleague Daniel Gallen. Daniel, we haven't heard from you in a little bit, so appreciate you hopping on board here. We have some things to catch up on. We're in a bit of a period right now where there's not a ton of fresh news coming out. A lot of the Penn State staff is on vacation. I'm going on vacation next week. I guess I'll just mention that. Our podcast will be on a hiatus for a week, but we've got a lot of things to keep track of and monitor, and it's time for us to start ramping up with our preview coverage of what will be preseason camp starting in approximately 1 month. So, Daniel, you ready for some questions about this team, and you ready to dive into it?
Yeah, let's do it. You put me behind another tough act to follow, but I'll do my best.
Well, I will say before we get to it, there was a tough act, and you got a long look at it. I know you were waiting in our green room, we'll call it, for a while before we brought you in. What did you take away from the commentary you heard from Brad over the course of that of our interview?
Yeah, I mean, I thought what he was talking about with Drew coming in the Purdue game and Drew not feeling rushed and feeling very comfortable. I thought that was really interesting, and I think that it's one of those things where what we saw from Drew from our kind of less experienced or less expert eyes matches up with what someone who knows Drew very well and has really seen him grow and develop. I think that having that match up I thought was interesting, and then everything he said about Ethan Grunkemeyer is I thought really fascinating, especially the way that Grunkemeyer went about his recruitment and reaching out to Mike Yurcich and kind of keeping those coaches in the loop, keeping them engaged. I thought that was really interesting. And I think it's another thing that shows that it's a bit of a two-way street with recruiting where, the coaches put in a lot of effort, but at the same time as a recruit and someone who isn't necessarily, an automatic 5-star, you kind of have to put in the work too a little bit to get on the radar, to build these relationships. So I thought that was really interesting. I mean, those highlights of Grunkemeyer at that 7-on-7 were a ton of fun, and I'm really excited to see what he's going to be able to do for Olentangy this fall.
Yeah, and we heard Brad Maendler mention the jump that he saw from Drew Allar's junior season tape to his senior season tape, and we're kind of talking about that anticipation. It was very good last fall. You're expecting almost greatness, over the course of this senior campaign based on what he's done this summer throughout the camp circuit. Before we get away from the quarterbacks, though, Brad was quick to point to Danny O'Brien with those recruitments, and he's not going anywhere. He's got a new role with this Penn State staff. And you wrote about it yesterday up at Lions247.com.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more interesting changes on the staff this offseason. Danny O'Brien, who spent the past 2 years as an analyst for James Franklin, he's moving into a graduate assistant role for Penn State. He's going to be one of their 4 GAs. That means that Danny O'Brien will be able to coach on the field during practices. He'll be able to be a lot more hands-on. As opposed to those analyst roles, which are during the season are a little bit more behind the scenes, that type of work. I think that it's kind of the next step for Danny O'Brien as he kind of, pivots his career. He played quarterback in the CFL for a very long time, did a little bit of coaching there, joined the Penn State staff in 2021. Obviously, he and James Franklin go way back to Danny O'Brien's time at Maryland when James Franklin was the offensive coordinator there. I think James Franklin was there for O'Brien's first 2 years in 2009 and in 2010 when O'Brien was ACC Rookie of the Year for the Terps. So, I think that during these summer camps, Mike Yurcich and James Franklin give Danny O'Brien a lot of run with the quarterbacks. He is a lot of times in charge of those groups. Sometimes it's the main group, sometimes it's a different group, but you're able to see the kind of coach that he is with his ability to be hands-on. And I think that he's someone in the industry whose trajectory is really pointed up, and he'll be able to be the GA for 2 years. And I think that this is definitely that next step for him to becoming a full-time, football coach at some level.
Yeah, former quarterback at Maryland, at Wisconsin, has settled in well here in Happy Valley. We've heard that over the course of the last couple of years, and this reaffirms that he'll be more of a long-term fixture here moving forward beyond 2023 as well. You never know who's going to come and go, especially when they're at that stage of their career. So this signifies a little bit of a commitment on both sides of the coin here. Daniel, let's get into it as promised. Put together 5 questions here. We do have a mailbag. This is unrelated, so I'm not scoffing at our mailbag. I'm suggesting that while we take a week of vacation time, that you stock up that mailbag. Give us all the questions you want to know. Unresolved recruiting from June, what you want to know about the late July recruiting push, and plenty of preseason questions. We have a full roster to dive into. So drop your mailbag questions over at Lions247.com. It's posted on our thread there at Lions Pride message board. But here are 5 questions that we put together ourselves because we thought they would generate some good discussion. And the first goes, who are you most excited to see in action when Penn State opens up camp? And I'll just I'll steal one of your answers, I would assume. The guy that we just spent the first 15 minutes of this podcast talking about, Drew Allar. Look, we're not going to get a long look at quarterbacks playing against defensive players. If you followed our practice coverage over the years, you know that's just not something that we're going to really be able to see much of. But there's something to be said about Sean Clifford not being involved in practices anymore over the course of a preseason camp and what it's going to look like game to game week. And we're really going to get to see Drew take command, I think, of this offense. We're going to get to see him be verbal out there during our looks. And I just want to see him sling a little bit, whether there's a defender out there or not. Open it up. Let us talk about it. Let us write about it. Not sure we'll get a ton in August, but he's got to be at the top of the list because that's where eyes are going to land when we get out on the field.
Drew Allar was at the top of my list for who I'm most excited to see. I think that when you talk about Penn State football in 2023 and you talk about the types of players that can really raise the ceiling from where Penn State was a year ago, 11-2, winning the Rose Bowl. I think you talk about elite quarterback play is something that can really take Penn State to that next level. I think that the college football playoff in its 4-team format, I think that it's shown that outside of a couple cases here and there, you really have to have elite quarterback play if you want to make it there and if you want to make some noise there. And Allar, 5-star quarterback, 24/7 Sports' top quarterback in the class of 2022. I think that there's a lot of expectations that he can be that type of quarterback. So that's what I'm excited to see. And when I made this list, answer these questions, he was the first one I wrote down.
Sticking on offense, we actually got a look at him over at Live for Life a few weeks ago, but Theo Johnson, who according to the roster is working his way towards 270 pounds at 6'6", and we already know that he can glide at that size. And the way he finished last season, 20 receiving yards through the first half of the year, and he was one of their primary pass catchers the second half of the season all the way through the Rose Bowl. It's all put together right there. And it just feels like you got maybe a pile of dynamite and you're ready to light it with Theo Johnson. It's felt like that since he emerged on the scene as one of the top tight ends in his class up in Canada. And there was a reason that he was so coveted. Georgia, Iowa, Michigan, Penn State, down the stretch of his recruitment. And they've been able to handle it because of their health at tight end and their strength at tight end. He's been able to develop the right way. He hasn't had to play more than was necessary early on because they had Pat Fryermuth, and they had Bretton Strange, and they've had Tyler Warren along the way. And when he missed some time last year and he wasn't all that involved in the passing game, got into mid-October, you started to wonder, is it going to click for Theo Johnson? We got that emphatic answer, and now where he is physically, you combine that with what the production is out there, availability is important for Theo Johnson. And I have him on this list in a big way because we haven't seen him since the Rose Bowl. Him, Tyler Warren, both sidelined throughout spring practice, but just watching him out there in a tank top and shorts, I want to see him put the pads on, run some routes, and challenge this defense. I think it's a very good Penn State defense, and I think Theo Johnson is the kind of player who could still find ways to give them headaches throughout the month of August.
I think by the time we get to the middle of the season, maybe October into November, and draft analysts kind of do their refresh of their draft boards, refresh of mock drafts, I think that Theo Johnson is someone who has the potential to be in that top 50 range. Getting second round buzz, maybe even first round buzz, depending on how it goes. I mean, I think if he'd come out last year and tested, I think he would have been gone by day 2. just or early on day 3 maybe, but just based on how he looks and his athletic traits. Someone else on the offense I put on this list that I think that you talk about someone that we haven't seen Theo Johnson since the Rose Bowl. I put someone that we haven't seen at all in a Penn State uniform, Dante Cephas.
Yep.
I think that it goes back to talking about Allar and having the ability to really raise the ceiling of this offense. I think that Dante Cephas at wide receiver, I think he has the potential to do that if he's able to bring that, maybe not all the production from Kent State, because it's really hard to do that in the Big Ten. But if he's able to kind of do what Mitchell Tinsley did last year, if he's able to improve on what Mitchell Tinsley was able to do for Penn State last year, I think that helps the Penn State passing attack. Wide receiver was a bit of a question mark this offseason. And if Cephas can answer that gives Allar another weapon. And I think that raises the ceiling of the offense a ton.
Cephas had 9 100-yard games during the last 2 seasons for Kent State. We'll see how it translates on a Power 5 field. His first practice at this level is coming up in August. A guy that got a year's worth of practice under his belt, more this spring, but we still don't know where he is right now. But we're hearing things. We're starting to, I think, this pendulum swinging in the last few months about where he is in his development. Caden Saunders, he was the highest ranked receiver out of the 5 they brought in last year. I'm including Christian Driver with that group, who was a cornerback in 2022. But it's a big group. Omari Evans burned red shirt. No one else did. Omari Evans has locked in a key piece, maybe a starting role, but definitely at least a rotational role with this receiver group. I don't think we can say the same for any of those other second-year wide receivers to this point. And out of that other group, not just because of his ranking and the speed that he brought to campus when he showed up, but just because of what we've heard about how it's translated on the field. Didn't seem like much was translating in terms of the testing numbers, in terms of the prospect profile for much of his freshman year as he was working his way through figuring things out. Things started to move in the right direction this spring, but what we've heard this summer and the carryover, I think, is encouraging. He's a guy I got on this list because I'm excited to see him, not because I think he's going to go out there and dominate and challenge these cornerbacks, but I just want to gauge where Caden Saunders is, because here in year 2, if we're talking about him being the dynamic field-stretching kind of weapon, or the guy that you can get the ball to 2 or 3 yards away from scrimmage and let him pick up 30 yards because of what he can do with that wiggle and straight line speed, that adds a whole different gear to this offensive attack. And it may not be there for them this year. It might not be there for Caden this year, but it's a big answer that we're going to get, I think, and we'll start to peel back that curtain a bit in August.
I also had Saunders on my list. I think that you go back to the recruiting ranking and the excitement that he came in with last year based on that recruiting ranking, based on what he was able to do as a high schooler out in Ohio. I think that the excitement for him as a prospect was warranted. And, after making that adjustment, having to change his body a little bit on the latest roster update, he was up to 180 pounds. And I think that he's someone who had to really kind of rebuild things a little bit. And, the bigger he can get, using that speed, being able to hold up against Big Ten defenses, I think that that's something that can bode really, really well for him moving forward. But he's someone that I'm very excited to see just in action, see how he looks compared to the other wide receivers on the roster. Even bringing in Dante Cephas to theoretically take one of those upper depth chart spots. I mean, there's still plenty of playing time up for grabs, and I think Caden Saunders is in a good position to seize on that.
And that slot position is particularly compelling because we know Keandre Lambert-Smith got a ton of run there in the spring. He told us recently that he's not sure if that will necessarily be the case, if he might be distributed more outside now that they got Dante Cephas here. Still kind of feeling that out, it sounds like. But then you've got Caden Saunders. People are still high on Liam Clifford and what he might be able to accomplish as a redshirt sophomore. Christian Driver was operating in the slot this spring. He's a guy that we've heard a lot about, him just being fast and aggressive and figuring it out at wide receiver now after a year at cornerback. So a lot going on in that position in particular. Defensively, look, it's littered with talent for Manny Diaz, and you could go in a lot of directions here, but I'm going to start with the guy who just blew up the blue-white game, deny Dennis Sutton. He put it to those offensive tackles. It was a humbling experience for the offensive line for much of that day, and he was a big reason why. Year 2, he was not an early enrollee as a freshman. Remember, he got to campus last summer, and he hit the ground running. I think he had 3 sacks by the time September was done. Then he was done with sacks, though, and kind of settled into getting 15 to 25 kind of snaps a game the rest of the way as a rotational piece. A lot is on the table this year, Daniel. We know that he's probably not going to start. The starting job is going to go to Adiza Isaac, Chop Robinson. Chop Robinson didn't start a game last year either. And I think the night Dennis Sutton has the potential, as if we're going to call him a 3rd or a 2A defensive end, to be, in my opinion, as disruptive, if not more disruptive, than what Chop Robinson was last year in that role. And you're upgrading the position because in your top three, all due respect to Nick Tarburton, it's a different trio than what you had last year. So I like the depth at the top of the position. I like the depth beyond these guys. Amin Vanover played a lot last year. We shouldn't discount him. But Denai Dennis-Sutton was a 5-star for a reason. One of the most epic Penn State wins in the recruiting trail that they've had under James Franklin, considering who they were in contention with. And I think it really is going to start to surface this year for everybody who's watching.
Yeah, I think Denai Dennis-Sutton is a good place to start. I had two of his position mates on my list that you mentioned, Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson.
It's a good group.
I definitely. I think with those two, they're both at different, for different reasons. Chop Robinson, he transferred in from Maryland where he was an outside linebacker. So he's getting his first full off season as a Penn State defensive end this year. He's put on some weight and he's gotten bigger. He's popped up on some of these draft boards as a buzzy late first round pick. And I think that having this full off season and being able to move up into a starting role, I think he's poised to really break out, really put up some big numbers. And then Adisa Isaac, kind of in a similar way to Chop Robinson, getting this full off season. He had the torn Achilles that cost him the 2021 season. In 2022, he kind of kept talking about, working his way back, getting as close to 100% as he could get. Now the fact that he's going to have, a full season of playing under his belt, now a full off season, knock on wood, healthy.
Daniel, this is Adisa Isaac's first, his year 5 for him. It's his first full off season of being healthy and with a program since he was a January enrollee in 2019, because 2020 got all screwed up by COVID. So you got to go back to his first year on campus when he had a year like this laid out in front of him.
Exactly. So, I think that him being able to have this full ramp up to the season, he's another one on the edge who his weight is up. He's gotten a little bit bigger. I'm excited to see what that looks like for Robinson and Isaac to really have those full off seasons. They really have that full preparation and ramp up, going into the season, and then to see if this edge group can be as special as we think it might be able to be.
Where else do you land on defense as we go beyond the defensive end room, which is enticing, but it is a really strong group, and we do have other questions to get to, so I don't want to spend too much time on this one. But I mean, the linebacker room and Abdul Carter, he's kind of controlling a lot of the narrative beyond the Drew Allar world right now. A lot of it is centered on what Abdul Carter can become as a sophomore.
Yeah, I'd Carter on my list for the obvious reasons. What is he going to do? He's another one. He got here last summer, so he's going to have the full off season, with Penn State. He's going to be a full-time player from week 1 this year, as opposed to last year where, he was in that reserve role. They had to shuffle the deck a little bit in October, and that got him onto the field. Then we saw the breakout. So what can he do hitting the ground running? That's what I'm excited to see. And then the other name in the secondary, Johnny Dixon. I think that he is someone who is really poised for a breakout. And I'm really curious to see how Penn State is going to use him. We saw him play both on the outside and on the inside last year. Penn State is looking for a versatile piece to move around the defense. What's the Prowler package going to look like? Can Johnny Dixon be someone who steps into that Jair Brown role a little bit? I'm really looking forward to see what he can do. It's his 3rd year in the program. Kalen King is obviously going to get a lot of highlights, and I think Johnny Dixon is going to have lots of opportunities. I think it'll be similar to what we saw last year with teams not throwing at Joey Porter Jr. as much, which let Kalen King, put up those insane PBU numbers. Now, maybe teams won't be throwing at Kalen King as much, which is going to give Johnny Dixon a lot of time to shine.
Yeah, Dixon's a guy that I've been banging the drum for since January. I'm right there with you. I'm actually going to mention him a little bit later on one of our questions, but I think he's really primed for a huge final season here with the program. I'm just going to finish this off. And by the way, we all want to see Tony Rojas. I mean, what do you got in line for us in Act 2? Act 1 was the talk of the town, and there's a lot of stuff to discuss on this team. But by the time we're getting through spring ball, we're focused on a freshman linebacker. It says a lot about what Tony Rojas did through his first semester here at Penn State. We've talked a lot about the weight going from about 195 as a signee to now 225 pounds coming up on preseason camp, and really want to see how much he can jostle things a little bit, because we kind of felt like we had an idea of what this linebacker group would look like coming out of the Rose Bowl because of all the players that were retained within this group. The only guy who left is Jonathan Sutherland, and yet now Tony Rojas, you don't want to call it a wrench in the plans because it's a good thing, but he kind of opens the door for a whole different way to kind of formulate your linebacker group, implement these guys in different positions. And we've seen the versatility. We've seen some cross training, not just from Rojas, but from different players, whether it's Curtis Jacobs or Abdul Carter. So you wonder what it's going to look like. And at the linebacker position, we got some other things to get into later here as well. But let's get into another discussion, and that's the freshman, because I'm excited to see Andrew Rapplier. I'm excited to see Dakari Nelson, who's 6'3" at least at safety, 205, 210 pounds at least at safety. And the other kind of wild card here that I think has really gone under the radar is Cam Wallace. And the way Jaywan Sider spoke about him to me about a month ago when we got a chance to get in the team facilities really changed the way I was imagining his potential role. We've heard some more feedback from program facilities about Cam Wallace since then. We've gotten some eyeballs on him as he was kind of hanging around at some of the camps. Physically, he looks like he's pretty well put together. Jaywan Sider called him country strong, but the narrative here is that he may be a guy that, because he comes from a rural area in Georgia, may have gotten glossed over by some of the heavyweights down there, and Penn State may have gotten a steal, and it might not take us a couple of years to find that out. We're talking about a gadget kind of player here. You could see him maybe run some routes. You could see him touch the ball and do some damage. I don't know if it actually comes to fruition for him this fall, but we've discussed it. With Trey Potts on board, it doesn't need to happen for these freshman running backs right now. You've got Singleton and Allen at the top of this group, but Wallace is a guy that I think maybe a lot of people wouldn't forecast as a freshman to do much. Let's just keep tabs on him. I'm excited to see him because he's a guy that we may see a bit of a blur on the practice field and say, who was that? What number was that? And then we look up the number and say, that's right, Cam Wallace is here. So just some freshmen to look at. I think we've already expressed our love for Andrew Rapplier enough during recent episodes, but this young man, it looks like he's ready to play some Big Ten football.
Definitely. I think we got a good look at the early enrollees. And I think that's something that was interesting about this class is that, the number of really, really intriguing guys that come this summer. I mean, you talked about with Rapplier, Nelson, and Wallace. Yeah, I think that those are three guys that, seeing them on the field and seeing how it actually stacks up against college competition. What does that actually look like? What are they able to do? How do some of these things that we saw on film when they were in high school, how does that translate? I think that's going to be really, really exciting to see.
And we said Dakari Nelson with his remarkable physical stature. Wow, he sure looked like a defensive back at the high school level against high school competition. Does that translate against Big Ten competition, high-level Power 5 competition, or do we start to see, well, maybe he is a linebacker? All we've heard so far is this guy's a defensive back, but I think we'll figure out pretty fast as he goes up against Mike Yursic's bunch how exactly he may fit in year one. Let's get into another question. Which players are not being discussed enough right now ahead of camp? And I guess part of that would be our fault as we are the Penn State football discussers. But where do you go? What direction? I think this is going to be a shorter list, but who do you kind of land on in terms of maybe under the radar at this stage?
First name that popped up to me was Keaton Ellis at safety. That's a room that has so much talent. You talk about the 8 guys that you can talk about in there, and a lot of them are younger, and kind of intriguing. KJ Winston got so much buzz. Dakari Nelson has so much buzz. Jalen Reed.
Nelson or Taki Wheatley is the takeaway king. So
exactly. I think that Keaton Ellis, by virtue of that, and also the fact that he's a 5th-year guy, he's been around for a while. He's seen a lot come and go. I think that that's something that can really cause him to fly under the radar a little bit. But he's going into his 3rd year of playing safety after beginning his career as a cornerback. When you talked to him at the Rose Bowl, he cited the opportunity to come back for another year to get coached by Anthony Poindexter as kind of a driving force for him to take the 5th year. So I think that Keaton Ellis is in a position to, maybe not necessarily take over, that Jair Brown role on the field, but I think that we're going to see him on the field a lot. I think that with his comfort in the defense, he'll be able to make some plays. And then just from an intangible standpoint, he's a team captain already. So I think that kind of speaks to, what he's able to do, the respect that he has within the team and, the role that he's going to have. So I think that he's someone that, it's really easy to talk about, to get caught up in Jalen Reed, Zakee Wheatley, KJ Winston, Mekhi Flowers, Tyrese Mills, King Mack, Takari Nelson, that long list. But I think that starts at the top with Keaton Ellis right now.
Great point that he was named the captain. That almost escaped my mind. One of the 3-team captains coming out of spring ball. The hometown kid, spent his first 2 years at cornerback, spent his third year banged up for the most part, and emerges as a safety starter last year. Although I think we've talked about this, very much distributed beyond Jair Brown, who had like 300 more snaps than everybody else. And then you had 3 safeties of pretty much landing in the same realm by the end of last season. Over on the offensive line, I truly do believe we're going to see 7-8 guys involved in September, much like we did last year. I don't think we're going to see 5 outright starters and then everybody else is on the sideline for the entire game. And with that in mind, I'm going to point to a couple guards that I'll be monitoring over the course of August. Certainly JB Nelson and then Vega Ioane, both in year 2 with the program. Nelson made the jump as one of the top-ranked junior college offensive linemen from Lackawanna College last year. Did a great job transforming his body, lost a bunch of bad weight, then built up some good weight. By the end of the season, a guy who had only played tackle coming into his Penn State career was feeling at home at guard. And I know that Phil Troutwine, just as recent as last month, told me, look, he's a guy who can kick out and he's going to be in competition to maybe be that 4th tackle. We've talked about freshman Javen Williams taking that job, but JB Nelson's another guy that has the versatility. But I want to know if Landon Tengwall enters this season as your no doubt about it starter at left guard, or is it like last year where Landon Tengwall gets the first 2 or 3 series and then we see by design JB Nelson gets involved? Last year, that was Hunter Norzad's job. But if you recall, Hunter Norzad missed the matchup against Central Michigan. And even with him out, we saw JB Nelson rotating in with Landon Tengwall. It wasn't like all the reps went to Landon Tengwall. Later in the season, with Hunter Norzad injured in a game against Indiana, we saw a lot of work go to JB Nelson. So while Nelson took a red shirt last year, he did get some significant experience in 2 matchups, and along the way, it was varsity reps with the practice squad. So I want to see what happens with him on the left side. And then Vega Ioane, just a redshirt freshman at this stage, but he's one of the more physically advanced linemen on this team since he set foot on campus last year from the Pacific Northwest. James Franklin's go-to line with him is no one's ever carried 360 pounds so well, or whatever weight he is that day. And it's certainly true. What I would love to see is to get some extended look at this thing in action, this freight train on the practice field, and see what it looks like going up against what I think we agree is a very deep and athletic defensive front. So we've heard good things from defensive linemen about Vega Ioane and what he presents in these matchups. Salim Wormley, really impressive to see him come back from an injury, start every game last season. That was his job. But I think, you're trying to figure out how do you maximize this team situationally. One guy may present something that the other cannot. And I think Vega Ioane over the course of August, and I think maybe seeping into September, that's an area where those 2 offensive linemen, Nelson, Ioane, not a lot of talk about them right now. They could have very important roles for the success of an offense that has playmakers across of it.
I stayed on the offensive line for my other pick on this one, and I went with Hunter Norzad. Making that switch from guard to center. He's got some big shoes to fill. Juice Scruggs really manned that spot well last year. Juice Scruggs was the constant with all of those injuries, all those moving parts around him over the course of the season, and he played his way into being a 2nd-round pick in the NFL draft in April. So I think that Hunter Norzad, I think that we have every reason to believe that he's going to be able to step into that role. He's getting the full off season after transferring in from Cornell. He got valuable experience last year at guard. He has been working at center, since he's been here. But, I think center isn't necessarily a plug and play position based on all the communication that goes into it. I think that there is a learning curve there. Hunter Norzad, Ivy League guy, definitely smart enough to handle it. I believe that he'll be able to handle it, but I think that that's another storyline to keep in mind, and another pretty big change on the offensive line when you talk about this team in 2023.
Yeah, Ivy League brain for Hunter Norzad, and also just brute strength. One of the
Yeah.
stronger members of this roster as well, and also names to know at center. New addition by way of Duke, formerly recruited by Phil Troutwine up at Boston College. Addison Penn has come in as a reserve walk-on, and Nick Dawkins is the other name to know. Whether he's maybe going to step up next year as that guy, or whether he factors in this year, to be determined. But he's in year 4 now. Is Nick Dawkins? He missed last season with an injury, also playing at center. I was just going to go to Johnny Dixon here really quick. I won't spend much time because you did. I don't think he's being discussed enough in terms of this defense. If you went to the average Penn State fan and said, list every Penn State defensive player you're excited to see this season, it would take too long, in my opinion, for them to get to Johnny Dixon. And that says a lot about the talent that is assembled on that side of the football right now. But I think because of what has happened at the cornerback position with Joey Porter Jr. being an All-American, and then Kalen King being the ascending All-American next man up, and along the way you've added these shiny blue chip players, well, Johnny Dixon has become a much different defender than he was when he arrived here from South Carolina. And at this stage, along the way last year, I thought I was just as impressed as his work near or behind the line of scrimmage as I was in what he was able to do in covering passes downfield and tracking receivers. And I think that combination and what you said about the role that we saw Jair Brown fill last year, and the way you can kind of fill the stat sheet in different ways and find yourself nosing the football, different areas of the field that you may not necessarily attribute to a defensive back, and in this case, a cornerback, that may be what you get from Johnny Dixon. And by the time we get through the regular season, won't surprise me at all if we're saying he's one of the 5-6 most important players on this defense, because he's a guy to me that they want the best 11. I don't see him leaving the field a lot this fall. And there's going to be times where they mix it up, and he will. But I think he's going to be one of those staples. And there are not going to be a lot of staples on this defensive unit because of all the rotations that are going to be in place. I think he's going to stick on the field a lot. So I got him on this list. You had him on the last list, and maybe now he's being discussed enough then, Daniel Gallen. Let's go over to the position battles. We've alluded to them a little bit here, sprinkled them in the conversation. Not every position battle is going to be sewn up by the time we get to mid-August. James Franklin has not told us who the quarterback one is. I think we know who it's going to be. There are, I don't think the quarterback competition's on this list, although it wouldn't surprise me if we don't hear who the quarterback is from James Franklin until maybe August 20th or somewhere in that range. But in terms of the position battles that we think are really going to grind it out and maybe go into the regular season, where do you kind of forecast that?
I went with the offensive line. I think you did a really nice job laying out the number of players that they have there, the guys that they're going to want to see in action. And, we saw last year the willingness to use a rotation, pretty deep into the season with Landon Tangwall, Hunter Norzad at left guard, Caden Wallace, Bryce Effner at right tackle. I think that's something that, we're going to see again this year, just based on the numbers that they have there, the talent that they have there. I think that if you want to narrow it down a little bit on the offensive line, I think that right tackle battle is something that could extend into the season, based on trying to rotate guys, feel out what you have there with Caden Wallace, with Drew Shelton. What does that actually look like? But, I think that, we're going to get into, through September, and we're going to have seen a lot of offensive linemen play a lot of snaps. I mean, I think that the two guys that, I don't see, budging off their spots really are Olu Fashanu at left tackle for obvious reasons. And then Hunter Norzad at center. It's really, really tough to rotate a center, based on the communication that goes in there. But, it wouldn't be a surprise to see, another rotation at left guard, kind of like you laid out. Will Sal Wormley rotate with someone at right guard to get, someone reps in there, and then right tackle. So I went right to the offensive line on this one.
Yeah, and you throw in the fact that they bring in 4 blue chip freshmen, including a 5-star and a couple other big-time prospects who were already on campus in January, and there's just so much competition for Phil Troutwine's room. It's in a really healthy spot right now coming off of the 2022 season and what they're building now. In the defensive line room, I think you look at the interior, the defensive tackle, PJ Mustipher is gone, but there's such a mix of experience and guys on the rise. The emerging player like a Zane Durant, who's now in his sophomore season, has put on weight, feels like he's more equipped to be an every down guy who can cover the run and rush the passer. He was more of a pass rush defensive lineman last season as a freshman who did impress and played in all 13 games. And then you've got an addition in Alonzo Ford, who upon the last roster update, he's 10 pounds or so heavier than when he was listed at Old Dominion, at least. Started every game the last couple of seasons with the Monarchs under Ricky Ronnie's leadership. And now he makes a jump up to Power 5 conference, and kind of like Cephas, a lot of track record at the Group of Five. What does it look like here? And then you think about three guys who have played really, it feels like they're kind of starters reps over the last few seasons. A lot of experience in the Big Ten trenches with Devon Elise, with Akeem Beeman. And then you've got just a bunch of interesting guys, I think, with Davon Townley. It's hard. Caleb Artis, year two. He's the heaviest guy of the group by 18 pounds. So what do you make of that group? I know I threw like 9 names your way, and I know I'm convinced I'm missing at least one. Oh, Jordan Vandenberg has generated some buzz. Guy who's had an international journey to get to this point. And Keziah Izzard, that was the name that stood out to me. He missed the first month of last year. We don't know why it happened, but by the time he got through the season, he was one of their most impactful defensive tackles, if not the most impactful guy, by the time they got through November. So, man, a lot in play there. Deion Barnes is going to be sorting through them. It's one of those things where I'm not necessarily concerned about the result, because there's enough talent there where I think that the cream will rise and it'll be a good group. But I think you're just like, what's it going to look like when we get out there on the practice field in August? And of course, when you get into September, who's going to be the guy that gobbles the snaps and doesn't leave? And who are going to be the guys that come in for 5-10 snaps and then go away for a while?
Yeah, I think defensive tackle was the other spot that popped up for me after offensive line. I think that you just have such a variety of body types that you should be able to account for almost any situation, any scenario. I think that Penn State has done a nice job of building that room, even if it doesn't necessarily look the way that I think some people would like it to. But, I think that defensive tackle group is in, a good position to kind of, like you said, let the cream rise to the top, see who the guys are that can really produce. And I feel like that's a thing that really does need to be settled on the field. I think that doing it in practice, I think, is good, but I think that we'll see how the rotation changes and evolves, going from West Virginia to Delaware to Illinois. I think that, and then with Iowa, I think that stretch of 4 games is going to be really intriguing to see, which guys are getting time, how this rotation changes, who disappears, who comes back, who starts. It's going to be really fun to watch. And I think that's something in October that we could see, 2 different guys starting that we saw against West Virginia in September.
We won't re-talk our way through all the receiver conversation that we did earlier, but obviously that's a room that's a competition that's going to be going on throughout the season. When you talk about the young, hungry talent in there, where guys, can you get to 6? I mean, that's the key here. James Franklin has hammered that home for years now. They felt like they were coming out of spring with maybe 3 with Omari Evans, in terms that he would publicly say, give his stamp of approval to. We'll find out. Malik McClain has a semester under his belt. He's a different looking receiver. Malik Mega, a different looking receiver. Can he put it together? Is he just really a special teams component? Is Liam Clifford going to be a viable option as a regular contributor for you? Or is he just going to be another guy? Are you going to have like the Caden Saunders, Anthony Ivies of the world, at least 2 or 3 of them step up and say, I'm here now, get me the ball, feed me, I'm ready? Or is it a group where you're still in wait and see mode? And it's a new coach who didn't recruit a lot of these guys to campus. So probably pretty important that we emphasize that Drew Shelton should not be taken for granted this year. Considering what he did last year, it said a lot about his development, about his prospect profile, coming in as a top 24/7 talent, putting on that weight. The coaching of Phil Trautwein, he started those final 5 games, and you were really able to weather a huge blow in losing an All-American quality tackle. But now he's moved to the right side. Remember last year, he's working on the left. He's working on the left, and he gets a chance to play on the left in games. Phil Trautwein told us recently that they're trying to get him 5 reps in the left side for every 10 he takes on the right, but it's a learning curve. We knew that going through spring ball. We heard it from Drew Shelton himself. We heard it from the staff. Caden Wallace talked about it. He was trying to bring him up to speed, even though he's competing with him for the job. So really curious to see what that looks like this summer, because, we know Caden Wallace has played a lot of football. There's a large sample size there right now. And I think people have their expectations for what and who Caden Wallace is in year 5. We'll see if he can buck that trend. He's talked about taking the next step. There's been a talk about dedication taking to the next level here as a year 5 guy. Does that come to fruition? I just know that last time we saw both those tackles who were competing for the right tackle job, it was a humbling day for them in the blue-white game against a high-quality defensive end group. And so you don't want to see that continue into September. I'm not sure they'll face a better defensive end group for much of the season, but a lot to learn there, I think, at right tackle, and much of the same at Mike, where it's the Mike linebacker position, where you've got components and competitors here who have played extended snaps in Big Ten football. We kind of know who they are a bit as Nittany Lions, but who's going to be the starter, who's going to win the job, and who's going to help you chase a championship. And you've got Tyler Elsdon, who we didn't see during spring ball. He was working his way back from injury. And you've got Kobe King, who, while Elsdon was the starter last year, King probably played about 40% of the snaps at the Mike position. And then the elephant in the room here for me with the spot is Abdul Carter start to impose his will at the Mike position when Manny Diaz blends things up, tries to work in all his most valuable weapons on the field at the same time. What does that mean for the Mike position? So I would just say right tackle, Mike linebacker, a little bit correlated because they involve, veterans. I know Drew Shelton's only in year 2, but guys that we've seen play extended, but we're not quite sure who's going to emerge and who's going to be ready to shine, because you don't just need starters who are good enough to not be a problem for you. If you want to win a Big Ten title, you need your Mike linebacker position and your right tackle position to be, above average performances.
Definitely. I think that the Mike linebacker is going to be one that goes into the season again. I think that last year, we never really got the true answer on who won that competition between Tyler Elsdon and Kobe King, because we saw so much of them. They can do different things. The emergence of Carter really gave Manny Diaz some flexibility with how he was able to use the linebackers. And like you said, if Carter can play the Mike, that changes things a little bit. That definitely changes the calculus. But I think that that's another position that I think that the fact that King and Elsdon showed last year that they could rotate through and the communication did not seem to lack much. I think that speaks to both of those guys' abilities, to kind of be glue guys in the middle of the defense at the Mike spot.
I know I promised 5 questions, but we went so hard on these first 3 questions that I think that's just going to be okay for this episode. We've got more summer we have plenty more summer to talk about this Penn State team. A few more looking forward questions to get to here on the podcast. But Daniel, fun stuff. Starting to recalibrate our coverage a little bit, going from the prospect camp part of the schedule and kind of the post-spring autopsy of this team. Now we're getting into it, man. This group is working together away from facilities, within facilities, and we're gonna get to the chance to see it in about a month, and then from there we're about 4 weeks away from West Virginia coming to town, and then it's really buckle up time. But Daniel, appreciate you breaking it down for me, for us, and for me, and also gonna step away from a week, so hopefully this episode was jam packed enough to give people plenty to chew on until we're back with another episode the week of July 17th.
Big Ten Media Days is in 3 weeks, so we're getting closer. That unofficial start to football season, we're creeping up on it, and it's getting pretty exciting for what Penn State could be in 2023.
That's right. Yes, still to come in July. Big Ten Media Days. We've got Lash Bash festivities coming here as well. Big recruiting event. We've got a big camp to cover here on campus as well. Daniel, appreciate all the hard work. People can catch your coverage at Lions247.com.
Thanks for having me, Tyler.
All right, great stuff from Daniel Gallen. Brad Maendler was fantastic earlier, breaking down the quarterbacks, current and future, in Ethan Grunkemeyer and Drew Allar. So a lot to look forward to here in the summer as we shift gears towards preseason coverage in just a little bit. As mentioned, stepping aside for a week, going to take my kid to the beach for a week and try to unplug from all things for just a little while, be back recharged and hyped up to talk about this Penn State football squad and whatever else is happening on the recruiting trail. Some key decisions coming up in the next coming days. Over at Lions247.com, Tyler Calvaruso, Brian Doan, Steve Wiltfong and company will have you locked and loaded with everything you need to know about Nittany Lions recruiting in the coming week. We'll rehash it all when we get back here on the podcast. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donohue. Thanks as always for listening to the Lions247 Podcast.